Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist. Learn languages, make a difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today I'm here to explain to you how to obtain an assistant professorship in the Tenure track. So, you now have an interview. Congratulations. What were the odds? Very slim, slim to none. To be honest, you just threw a basketball shot from the other end of the court like that, like a circus shot, and it went in. What were the odds? 1 out of 200, 1 out of 250, but it went in. So congratulations. This is a massive improvement. You go from 1 out of 200, 250 to 1 out of 15, 1 out of 20 chances. You go from throwing a shot from the other end of the court to now throwing a shot from the halfway line. So this is something very positive. And you should not take it lightly. It means that your application documents, particularly your cover letter and your CV, have something that you're doing right, have something positive to offer to the job market, and your application materials have the potential to succeed. Now you have also proof of concept. You have a document that you know was read by a search committee and was pre-selected for an interview. So this is very positive, very good news. That said, the interview is an entirely different sport. Have you heard this song that says, "Video killed the radio star"? Because that singer sounded great on the radio, and then people watch it on video, and he was trash. And that's what happens sometimes in the academic market. Your application materials look great, and then you go on to the interview, and if you're not ready, you will blow it. So your job is to prepare as well as possible and to have an entire workflow in your mind that goes from the if X then Y, if A then B, and has as many variables as possible covered. So do me a favor, allocate 10 hours to prepare this interview. Mind you, the interview will only be 20 to 30 minutes long, but trust me, I've been here before, been there, done that. Allocate 10 hours for your first interviews. Once you're in your second year, you can say 8 hours for each interview, okay. But for the first interviews, trust me, 10 hours. So the first thing you're going to do, you're going to go to the institution's website and you're going to identify the type of institution you're dealing with. Whether this institution is R1, Small Liberal Arts College, R2, Teaching College, or Community College. Identify that first. That will give you the key angle from which to approach this interview. Then go to the department you have applied to and identify the members of the search committee. Write down their first names and surnames. Write down their publications. And if possible, get a copy of their CVs to see their accomplishments. Maybe before being at the University of South Dakota, they were at NYU and you also graduated from NYU. You can drop that in the interview. Whatever makes them feel seen, heard, and portrays you as collegial and somebody they will love to be around on a weekly basis. Once you have done that, it's time for you to prepare the questions they might ask you. And the good news is that the Zoom interview is very formulaic. They're going to always ask you the same questions, sometimes with a slightly different phrasing, but the underlying principles are always the same. The interview is going to go like this. You're going to be waiting on Zoom. Sometimes, a lot of times, committees are not necessarily going to be punctual because you are not the center of their world. They have 15 to 20 candidates and you're just one of them. Okay, so sometimes their previous interview will go over 5 minutes or 10 minutes extra. Sometimes they are running from their coffee break, etc., or one member is late, etc., etc. So be ready for that. You might be super nervous and ready at 2:30 p.m., which is the time they told you, and it's 2:35 p.m. and you haven't started yet. You have to take that into account. That is going to happen, so be ready for that. Then, when they actually connect, there's going to be some chit-chat. This is no European stiffness. Hello, good sir. So let's start the interview. This is America, baby. Oh, how is the weather like? I heard it was snowing hard last night in New York City. Is everybody safe out there? And you kind of have to play along, right? So don't rush. Don't try to shift the topic of the conversation to the interview itself. Don't say, so when are we going to start the interview? No, just play along for as long as they feel comfortable with, right? You say, oh, yeah, it was crazy, but 2 years ago, it was even harder. So yes, no, in New York City, it's always like that. It's always a headache, and just keep on going until they say, okay, let's start the interview. Okay, just keep on going. When you start the actual interview, they're going to begin with the fifth question, which is, why have you applied for this position at this specific institution? They might also phrase it as, why are you a good fit for this institution? Or tell us a bit about yourself. This is your chance to explain your fit with the institution. So have 3 to 4 points that you're going to mention. For instance, if the institution is an R1 and you graduated from an R1, then the fit is obvious. I come from an R1 institution, so I'm used to this culture in which I have thrived for the last 3 years, and this and this and that, right? If you don't come from an R1 institution and you're applying to an R1 institution, say, for instance, I was doing my PhD studies at an R2 institution and I realized that I have a passion for research, and that's why I devoted so many hours to it, had these recent publications that show evidence of what I just said to you, and figured that an R1 is actually a better fit than the kind of institution I come from, right? So you're going to have to mention 3 or 4. The type of institution has to be mentioned. You also want to mention, for instance, if it's in a small village or a big city. Again, if you've been in a big city before, there you go. I'm used to living in a big city, so I'm sure that I can perform again in a similar environment. If you're not, I'm tired of being in a small village, and I'm sure that what I need is a big city such as the one where your institution is located, etc., etc. So type of institution, size of the city. What else can you say? You can mention something cultural. I love North Dakota because my uncle lives there. Does your uncle live there? Probably not. Do they have a way to verify that? Probably not. So you can say that and make the connection much more immediate, etc. You can also mention political or religious affiliations. I feel that the humanities are under threat nowadays, and your institution is doing a marvelous job at offering opportunities for political dissent. And my PhD dissertation is precisely about that, is offering a platform to marginalized voices, for instance, right? Or your institution is a Catholic one, and I was baptized and raised as a Catholic, so I share your mission and I look forward to furthering it. Things like that. Once you have explained the fit, you're going to be asked questions that can be classified either under research or teaching. Surprise, surprise, if this is an R1 institution or a small liberal arts college, the questions are going to be focused on your research. If, however, this is an R2 or a teaching college, let alone a community college, most of the questions are going to be focused on your teaching. Here, what you're going to answer is based on what you wrote in the cover letter and the CV. Do not assume that the search committee remembers anything of what you wrote in the CV and the cover letter. Remember, you're not the only applicant. They have 20 applicants. They are on a low salary, high stress, high workload environment, and they barely remember 5 to 10% of your application. So it's on you to remind them of how great your application is and why you should be selected. Let's start with research. When they ask you about your research, the first question is going to be a general one that matches what you replied in your cover letter apropos research. For instance, tell us about your research, something like that. And what you have to do is exactly to tell them what you already wrote in the cover letter. So you say, my research focuses on A, B, and Z area and deploys X, Y, Z methodologies. That's it. You can say a couple of sentences about each of the areas and a couple sentences about each of the methodologies. You shouldn't go overboard with the length of the answers, okay? Aim for 3 to 4 minutes maximum, no more than 4 minutes per question. Again, the interview is only going to be 20 to 30 minutes. So if your answers are 4 minutes long, how many questions can they ask you? Do the math. 5, 6, 7, not many more. Now we're still in the research part. They're going to ask you about your PhD dissertation. So you need to have your elevator pitch very clear in your mind and just use it. Again, this is something you probably mentioned in the cover letter. Those 2 or 3 lines about your dissertation, those are the ones you have to communicate now. Then they're going to ask you about your publications. Again, offer the summary that you already presented in the cover letter. And maybe they ask you about your research plans, especially if it's a research-focused institution. Here, your job is to convince them that you have a research agenda that is specific and ambitious enough that they can grant you tenure in 5 years if they hire you for this position. That is the name of the game, meaning I'm working on this manuscript, which is going to be published within 2 years. And on top of that, I would like to author 3 journal articles on this and this topic to be sent for publication to these and these journals in particular. Again, just like in the cover letter and the CV, I need you to be evidence-driven, specific, clear. Forget about emotions, forget about vagueness, forget about hopes. Mention specific, clear, empirical things. Now we go into the teaching. In the teaching section, they're going to start with a teaching philosophy question, which targets the second paragraph of your teaching statement. So they're going to ask you, so how do you go about teaching, or what is your teaching philosophy, or how do you envisage teaching? How do you conceive of teaching? Any of these phrasings, right? And the answer is always the same. You're going to have a teaching philosophy anchored on 4 to 5 principles, and you're going to list and explain each of them one at a time. For instance, you can say, for instance, my teaching is premised on 5 principles. The first one is that it has to be student-centered. To me, teaching is a service, and it should revolve around students. The second one is consistency. I want the students to make slight progress every single week, and for that I design the assignments and methodologies that allow me to track such progress. The third one is that teaching has to be social. It is not something that happens in isolation, it is something that happens collaboratively. So I design activities to make them work in pairs or groups of 3 or 4. The fourth principle is cultural. Teaching has to be cultural because learning a language is learning how to participate from a way of life. Therefore, when they learn Spanish in my classes, I want them to feel the culture of Spanish-speaking countries, and that's why I also lead study abroad programs that allow me to visit Spain, Guatemala, Colombia, etc. with my students for a month during the summer. And last, but certainly not least in our times, the digital environment. Digital is key to my teaching, and I utilize platforms such as Kahoot, Canvas, Moodle, and I have recently developed a chatbot that can interact with users for free in endangered languages of the global Hispanophone. I'm working on this area and I'm implementing advancements in both my research and my teaching. See, that was a comprehensive answer in 3 to 4 minutes. It's clear that I know what principles I follow. It's clear that I know what they mean. And it's clear that they are useful to my teaching. Now it's on you to believe me or not, but it was essentially a good answer. The next question I'm going to ask you is, okay, these principles, this teaching philosophy sounds very good in abstraction, but how does a typical class of yours look like? They might ask you for a specific course, for instance, how does a Spanish intermediate class look like? How does a Spanish beginners class look like? How does a Spanish literature class look like? And you're going to go through the entire timeline of the class. You're going to say, for instance, I start by greeting my students by their first name and surnames. And then I start with a warm-up activity. I ask students to stand up and come to the center of the class and talk about what they did last weekend in Spanish. And after 1 minute, I ask them to change and move into a conversation with a different person. And after 5 minutes, I ask them to go back to their place and we share the topics they discussed. And if I see any mistakes during their conversations, rather than interrupting those conversations, I make a note and then I address those mistakes in front of the entire class without saying who necessarily said what, because what's important is the grammatical structure and the vocabulary that was used rather than the person who produced it. Then I follow with a short lecture on a grammatical point, followed by a Q&A. If somebody has questions about that specific grammatical point, then that's the right time to asks those questions, and this is followed by practical hands-on activities. So I split students in pairs or groups of 3, and I have them review the content with specific exercises, typically dynamic, involving visuals, videos, etc. And then I conclude the class with a demonstration of learning, which is about reviewing the content in a way which is fun and engaging. For instance, it can be a Kahoot activity with 10 questions, each of which target a specific part of the content that was discussed in the class. And again, this is followed with a Q&A to make sure that everybody is on the same page. That is a typical rundown of a class. And again, this answer is between 3 and 4 minutes. Next, they're going to ask you, what courses can you teach? And this is when your research on their catalog for the cover letter and the interview pays off. You know exactly what courses they teach, and you know exactly what your profile fit with those courses is, so that now you can name specific courses. Well, I can teach courses in this and this and this area, and then you go to the specifics, which is why I would love to teach your SPAN 478 class. I think this is fascinating and very much builds on my previous experience. And also your SPAN 359 and 352.5 courses seem very feasible for me. Now, I'm also looking forward to implementing new courses such as this and this and this. And then if they have any follow-up questions to any of your above replies, they can do that. Typically, they don't. This is a first round interview. They might follow up a couple times if something is not clear or they're curious about a specific aspect, but otherwise they won't. And then you're already approaching the end of the interview. After seeing how you respond to the general fit, to the research and to the teaching, or the general fit, the teaching and the research, it can be in any of those 2 orders, they're going to ask you general questions. This can be 3 different ones. This can be diversity. How do you handle diversity? Now you think about your diversity statement and you're going to mention the strategies that you use to address diversity in both your research and your teaching. This is important. This is not a specific question about your research or your teaching. This cuts across both. So you should address both. Maybe for your teaching, you, the first day of the class, say that you are from Spain, that you speak with this accent, share your stories about negative and positive prejudices about your accent in Spanish and English respectively, etc., etc., and then open the floor to everybody else to create a sense of community. That's your teaching. How do you advance diversity in your research? Well, in my dissertation, one of the main topics is Islamophobia. I expose Islamophobia in Spain and explain how to dismantle it and advance past it. Now you have effectively answered their question. Another question can be about technology. How do you implement technology? Again, say how you implement technology in your research. For instance, in my PhD dissertation, I used corpus linguistics, which helped me make the most of my critical discourse analysis because it allowed me to identify collocations, visuals, etc. And then you talk about technology in your teaching. I think it's very important to keep students engaged and to end on a high note, which is why I always use a Kahoot demonstration of learning at the end of my classes, for instance, right? So address both research and teaching. And then they can ask you, what are your plans for the next 5 to 10 years? This is another way of asking you, can we trust that if we hire you, you are going to get tenure here and not waste our money? And your answer is going to be in the direction of reassuring the committee, okay? So you're going to say, I understand that yours is an R1 or small liberal colleges or R2 or teaching college or community college institution, and therefore the expectations for tenure are likely to be such, such, and such. Accordingly, I will do this in the next 5 years. For instance, if it's a teaching-focused institution, I will make sure to develop new courses to obtain high scores in the students' evaluations, to innovate with AI and technology, etc., etc., etc. If it's a research-based institution, I will make sure to publish a monograph and 3 peer-reviewed journal articles at prestigious journals, blah, 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 okay? And you want to be, again, as specific as possible. The first year, My manuscript will come out second year. I will work on this journal article for this journal in particular. The third year, I will work on a book chapter, etc., etc. You need to have that answer ready. You cannot improvise here. And last but not least, they're going to give you a free question, which is going to be, do you have any questions for us? And of course you do, because if you don't, it shows that you're not prepared enough. So you're going to have questions ready for them. Again, don't improvise. Have those crystal clear in your mind. Questions you make are also going to reveal your priorities. So if you ask them about the salary, they're going to know that you, my friend, are a mercenary, and not only a mercenary, but a shameless mercenary. So don't ask them about the salary, especially if it's a public university. If it's a public university, the salary is public, my friend. So this question only even makes sense in a private university, but you don't want to do that because if it's private, chances are that the salary is good anyway. So it's going to be good news. Don't ask about that. Ask instead about questions that show you in your best light, that show that you care about the people you're talking to, that you care about the institution, etc. For instance, Professor Gutierrez, I looked up your profile on the department's website and I realized that you've published about soccer in 2010 in South Africa. I recently went to South Africa and I want to tell you that the specific stadium you mentioned is actually one of the best stadiums I've ever seen. It's so great. And you know, I'm just actually researching that specific stadium as part of my next article, and I would love to cite your article in my publication. See what you did there? You let them know that you know who they are, you took interest in the research, you want to advance their own research by citing them, which is great for them, and you are a colleague with whom to cooperate and to collaborate, so that's great. And so if this has to be phrased as a question, you can say, do you plan to publish on this field further? You're not really interested in whether this person plans to publish on this field or not, but you phrased it as a question, which was the name of the game. All the questions you might ask are about students, for instance. What are the demographics of your students? In the past, I've worked with first generation students. Is that something that I will see in your institution? And if you're going to ask that, you should know the answer. You should know that the answer is yes. And they will like that you ask that question because it shows that you understand the ethos of the institution and the kind of students they need you to teach, which are the same students you have already been successful teaching in the past. So that's great. Okay. And the final question could be about the timeline of the search. This is good because this puts pressure on them, but it's a nice pressure. So it's a kind of pressure that lets them know that you're interested in continuing in the process, that you're not just going through the motions, that you intend to go to the campus interview and secure that position. And at the same time, it allows them to clarify and to reassure you perhaps as to how long each of the stages is going to take. So it also sub-communicates that you might be in the job market applying for other positions, and that's why you need to know their timeline, because you need to make sure it doesn't conflict with the timeline of other universities. So it kind of puts them in scarcity as to the fact that they might lose you to a better competitor, and it makes you more valuable by contradistinction. So that's a good question too. Again, whatever questions you ask, the most important thing is that you ask questions and that those questions are not improvised. Okay. When the interview is over, what you should do is to open a Google Docs. And now that the questions and the experience is still fresh in your mind, you're going to write down the questions that they asked you and color them depending on how comfortable you felt answering those questions and how easy you found them. So the easiest questions are going to be highlighted in green. Questions where you generally replied well but could have done better are going to be highlighted in, say, yellow or brown. And then questions where you really felt that you actually were not ready for the question and need to work on that, you can highlight that in red. I'm aware of the fact that this color classification is profoundly Western-centric. So if you are Chinese, then you can change your green questions and put them in red because red signifies prosperity and good luck. I'm aware of that fact. But generally speaking, if you come from the West like me, This is an intuitive way of classifying those questions, okay? And the last thing you're going to do is track this application through Wiki Academic, which I already told you about in the previous video. Good luck.